Hi, my name is Shailen Chauhan and welcome to my course Introduction to ASP.NET Web API on .NET. I am Microsoft MVP, consultant and corporate trainer. ASP.NET Web API is a framework for building HTTP services that can be consumed by a broad range of clients including browsers, mobiles and tablets. ASP.NET Web API is an extension of WCF REST API. So this course is all about the ASP.NET Web API. In this course, we will learn about what is SOA, like service oriented architecture, what is REST, what are the various REST principles, followed by the REST-based services, introduction to ASP.NET Web API, choosing between WCF and Web API. So it will give you the idea like where you should use WCF and where you should use Web API. Setting out element environment with the help of Visual Studio and Postman, creating ASP.NET Web API using Visual Studio, introduction to Postman, and testing our Web API using Postman. To start this course, no prior knowledge is required, but to do hands-on, make sure you have installed Visual Studio 2015 or higher version. And here we are using Postman for testing our API. So Visual Studio latest version can be downloaded from visualstudio.microsoft.com. and the Postman can be downloaded from getpostman.com. Then just download here Postman app for testing our REST API. I hope you will join me in this journey to learn ASP.NET Web API with introduction to ASP.NET Web API on .NET. So let's get started. So let's understand the service oriented architecture and simple object access protocol. So where we use service oriented architecture and where we use SOAP. You should have the idea before learning the REST-based services. It will help you to understand how the REST-based services are different from the traditional SOAP-based services. So let's start with SOA, or you can say the service-oriented architecture. So SOA is an architectural design pattern which states that every component of a system should be a service. Or you can say a system should be composed of several loosely coupled services. So this is about the service oriented architecture. And what other services are composing that system? That services should be independent from each other. It means the changes in one of the service should not affect any other service. And when you're talking about the service oriented architecture, so WSDL, that is a web service description language, UDDI, that is universal description, discovery and integration, and SOAP, like simple object access protocol. So these are the fundamental pieces of the service oriented infrastructure. So WSDL we use for the communication between client and service. And when you're talking about the UDDI, so UDDI is an XML based standard for describing, publishing and finding the web services. So UDDI is a specification for a distributed registry of web services. So when you're looking for a service, so that service is located with the help of UDDI. Then we are having the SOAP, like simple object access protocol, how the client will communicate with the service. So the SOAP is used in the communication. It's a protocol for the communication between client and service. So now let's understand in the next slide what is SOAP. SOAP is a simple object access protocol, and it is a XML based protocol built on the top of HTTP or sometimes TCP/IP and SMTP protocol. It means SOAP can be used with HTTP protocol, TCP/IP and SMTP. And the data it always transfer in XML format. And the SOAP support both stateless and stateful implementation. So the stateless implementation SOAP support with HTTP protocol, and the stateful it support with TCP/IP protocol. So in stateless communication, the user states cannot be maintained at the service end. So let's say there is a counter in the service, and that counter value you are updating from 0 to 1 when you're calling the method, let's say update counter. So in the stateless manner, that counter always starts from 0. But if it is stateful, in a stateful, that counter value will increase like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it is a way how it's maintaining the session of the user. It's not the session as we have in ASP.NET, but it's a session only for user request. And the request, how many times the user will call that method again and again, so whatever the things are happening in that request, so that is going to maintain as a session. And the SOAP always use WSDL for the communication between client and service. So whenever communication is required, so always the WSDL is shared to the client so that the client can communicate with the service. And in the .NET Web Services and WCF, both are based upon the SOAP, or you can say both uses the SOAP protocol for the communication. So that's why in WCF we get the data in XML format, or you can say that as a SOAP envelope. Same way in web service also we get the data as a SOAP envelope. So this is about the service oriented architecture and the SOAP which we use with WCF and the web services. Because before the web API and the REST based services, we everywhere use the WCF and the web services, or you can say we use the SOAP based services. So this is about the SO and the SOAP. REST. So now let's understand the REST. What is REST? So REST stands for representational state transfer. In fact, it is an architectural style, or you can say it is a concept to describe a hypermedia distributed system such as web. So when you're talking about the web, so web is actually a hypermedia distributed system. And here RO is an example of the service architecture based upon the REST style. So when you will say like who is based upon the REST, so RO is like resource oriented architecture. Now let's understand what is ROA, because so far we just learned about the style, we just learned about the concept introduced by the REST. So RO is a service architecture based upon the REST style, and it is based upon the concept of resource. Now let's see what is the resource. So resource is an information that has a name like image, document, audio, video, like any other information that has a unique address that is represented by a URI. So every resource over the internet which is having a unique URI, and the resource can be any information. The information can be image, audio, video. So whatever the image is, audio, video, you are access through the internet. So this is referred to as REST in terms of, this is referred to as resource in terms of resource oriented architecture. So RO is also referred to as a RESTful architecture. Like as we have the service oriented architecture, same way we are having ROA, like resource oriented architecture. And here resource means any information which is having the unique URI. And that information can be the image, that information can be audio, video, like any other document. And here all the services which are actually following the REST style, they follow the REST principle as well. Now let's understand what are the various REST principles we have. So first one is your addressable resources. It means each resource should be identified by a URI, or I can say unique identifier. So when you are willing to access any resource, so the resource should be a unique URI. URI mean doesn't URL, because more than one resources can have the same URL, but URI should be different always. In URI, you can think it is a combination of HTTP verb and your address we're willing to call, because on the same address I can make the get request, I can make the post request, I can make the put request. But when you're making the different type of requests, so every time the resource would be different. So this is about the addressable resources. So URL can be same for multiple resources, but URI would be different. So URI can be think as a combination of URL plus your HTTP var. So URL is a subset of URI. The second one is a simple and uniform interfaces. So you should keep your interfaces simple and uniform. Interfaces means the communication end, and this can be achieved by using the HTTP protocol uniform method and combining the same with our resources to perform the operation. So simplicity can be achieved by a common protocol which is known to everyone. So HTTP is the common protocol which is known to everyone. So that's why in the REST based services we use everywhere HTTP protocol, and we use HTTP protocol verb like get, post, put and delete. So this is the second principle of the REST a REST service must follow. The third one is here representation oriented. If you remembered about the SOAP based services, in the SOAP based services there is a WSDL always, which is used for communication between client and service. But in REST there is no WSDL like concept, because WSDL contains the entire information about the service, like what the various operation we are having in the service, and what the each receiving parameter type we are having in operation. So WSDL is a schema which is describing our service and its operation. But in REST based architecture we don't have such thing. So it says representation of resources are exchanged. So every time we share the representation of data, we never share the schema. And the representation can be in many format. It can be in XML format, it can be in JSON format, it can be in Atom format, it can be your own format as well. But if you will see in the WCF in the web services, we always having the SOAP based envelope, which is always sent from service to the client. There is no way to share the data in other format, but here we are having, and here we are not using any WSDL like way to share the schema with the client. There is no way. You need to tell to your customer what the various methods we are having in our service and how you can call them. The next one is here communicate stateless. So when you're talking about the communication between client and service, so here communication would be always stateless. It means any session specific data which can be maintained in SOAP based services, because the SOAP based services are stateless as well as stateful, but it is supporting only stateless implementation. But sometimes it is required, we need to use the session specific information. So that information you need to pass with every request when you are using the REST based services. So here the communication would be always stateless, and any session specific data should be held and maintained by the client itself. And if it is required to pass to the service, so with every request you need to transfer it to the server, so that on the server side you can use it for your purpose. The next one is here cacheable. So whatever the response we have received from the service end, that response a client should be able to cache for the further use. So sometimes it's a requirement of our business. So instead of querying the service again and again, so whatever the cache data we are having, we are willing to use that one. So this is about the REST principle. So what are the services we have in the market which are following the REST principle are referred to as RESTful services. So the RESTful services you can build in Node.js, in Java, PHP, in .NET. So in .NET, Web API is a way to build the RESTful services. Even you can use WCF REST also. But WCF REST nobody is using, because WCF REST now has been extended into the ASP.NET Web API. Or you can say ASP.NET Web API is the next version of WCF REST for building the RESTful services. In the next session, we will discuss about the ASP.NET Web API. ASP.NET Web API. ASP.NET Web API is a framework for building HTTP services. So if you're planning to expose your data using HTTP protocol, so in that case you should use ASP.NET Web API. So ASP.NET Web API uses the standard HTTP protocol methods like get, put, post and delete. So using all these methods, we can interact with our API to perform the create, update, delete and retrieval operations here. It supports multiple text formats like XML, JSON, Atom, etc. So we can return the data from the Web API either in XML format, either in JSON format, either in others format as well. It is completely stateless. So we cannot maintain the state for a client, just like we can maintain the state in ASP.NET using the session here. So it is completely stateless. So if there is a requirement for maintaining the state, so in each and every request you have to pass the data as a request header to our REST API. It is based on the lightweight RESTful architecture. So Web API is based upon the RESTful architecture. So whatever the principles we have in REST style, the same principles are followed by the Web API. Even it supports ASP.NET MVC features as well. So as we have the controller, actions, filters, model binders, so same things are also supported in Web API as well. So when you will write the code in ASP.NET Web API, you will have that element experience exactly as we have in ASP.NET MVC. It supports self-hosting and IaaS hosting as well. So if you want to deploy it, so we can deploy it using the IaaS and even we can deploy using the self-hosting options as well. So these are the ASP.NET Web API features we can use for developing a RESTful API. Building ASP.NET Web API service. So let's see how we can build our ASP.NET Web API using the Visual Studio. So here I'm using the Visual Studio 2017 for creating our ASP.NET Web API project. So just go to the file options here and I am just creating a new project. And here we have the option for creating the ASP.NET web application using the .NET framework. Specify your application name. So I'm defining my application name, let's say web API. So web API is my application name. Then specify the location. So as a location, let's say I'm defining here desktop. Then from here you can select the framework like 4.7, 4.5. It's up to you what the framework you are using here. So here I'm using the .NET framework 4.7, that is the latest one, but you can also use here 4.5 as well. So click on the OK button. So these are the available templates which we can use for creating the different types of application here. So here I suggest you just go with the empty template and just check this web API option. It will create the ASP.NET Web API using the empty template. So whatever the necessary settings are required for developing a simple ASP.NET Web API, it will add using this option. So if you will see here, let's what are the folders are generated by the Visual Studio. Let's see. So here we have app_data folder. So if you want to put your database file locally at the project level, you can put in this app_data folder. But generally in practical scenario, like in real life, we have the separate database. So using the database connection string, we can access our database. And you can see we have here app_start folder. So in this folder, we specify all the application level setting. So let's say as soon as your application will start, so these configuration files settings are going to applicable at our application level. So this API config file is having a method register, and the register we are mentioning a default root for our application. So default API is my root name here, and this is a root template, like how it will accept the request for our API. So if you will see here, API is a word here, and then you have to pass the controller, and here just like ASP.NET MVC, we are not passing the action name here, because here the action will be decided based upon the request. So if you are making the get request, so it will call the action which is accepting the get request. If you are calling an action using the post request, it will call the action which is accepting the post request here. So this register method we are calling in our global.asx application underscore start method. If you will not call it here, so this setting will not be applicable globally. So it is mandatory to call the all the app underscore start folder configuration file setting here. Then if you will see controllers folder is empty, models folder is empty. So all the controllers for our web API we will add in this controllers folder. All the models like object we will add in this models folder. And here if you will see we have a packages.config file. So this packages.config file is containing the information about like which version of web API we are using. So you can see here we are using the web API 5.2.3 version, a web API client again 5.2.3 version. Even if you will install the entity framework in our application, so that entity framework information will also contain by this packages.config file. So this packages.config file is containing the information about all the NuGet packages used by our project. And if you will see there is a web.config at the root level. So this root level web.config file objective is to define the application level setting. Let's say we define here database connection string, we define here modules, handlers. So whatever the things are required globally, so those things we configure here using the web.config file. So our database connections thing we will define in this web.config file here. So let me show you the way like how we can create our web API here. So let's first of all just create a controller. So just do right click on the controllers folder and add a controller. And here from the available scaffolding template, just select web API to controller empty. So I'm using here the empty template. Now it is asking for the controller name. So as a controller name, I'm just passing here user because we are going to create an API for performing the CRUD operation on a user database table. So just click on the add button. So using scaffolding, it is generating the code for us. So again, scaffolding is a code generation technique used by the Visual Studio for generating the code for us. So you can see here user controller is a class and is going to inherit it from this API controller. So this API controller is here responsible for managing the request and response for our requests which we are making for accessing this ASP.NET Web API. So let's just do one thing. Let's define a simple method here, and that method I will use for exposing some data here. So let me define here. So I'm just using here public, and my method return type is let's say string, and just I'm using here greet. In the greet, what I will receive the name, and from here I can return, let's say return what the name I'm passing, that name value I will return, let's say welcome, then name. So it will return the name which we are passing for calling this greet. And guys, here if you want to call this method using the get request, so what we have to do, we have to decorate it with HTTP get request, otherwise we cannot call this greet method. So here you have two options: either decorate the method using the HTTP get attribute, either just specify your verb name as a prefix like get greet, like get data, like get users, in this way. So we are not using here get as a prefix, so I'm just using the HTTP get attribute as a decorator. And just like ASP.NET MVC, here in Web API config file we can define more than one routes as well as per a requirement. So if you will see here, ID is the receiving parameter as a root parameter for accessing here, but if you will see, we are not using the ID, we are using the name here. So name you can pass here as a query string when you are trying to access this greet method. Let's see. So let's run the application here. So if you will see here, it's not showing any data to us, because for accessing the web API we have to follow the proper path. So API, then your controller name is user, then what the parameter you are passing. So we are not passing any parameter as a root parameter, so but we are passing as a name. So I am passing as a query string. Let's say I'm passing my name, let's say Shailendra. So you can see here I am getting the data here, welcome Shailendra, because I am accepting the parameter name as name. So if I will pass here the full name, let's say Shailendra Chauhan, it will show the message here like welcome Shailendra. In this way we can call our web API method here. Simple. And this way we have created a simple ASP.NET web API, and it is having a single method create, and it is exposing the data to us. In the next session we will see here like how we can perform the CRUD operation on a user table in a database. Web API CRUD operations. So let's see how we can write the code for performing the CRUD operations here using ASP.NET Web API. So here I'm using the last project which we have created in the last session. So what I have done here, in the models folder we have added a user class. So this user class is having properties like user ID, name, address and the contact number. Now here I'm just going to use entity framework as an ORM tool so that we can perform the CRUD operation here. So first of all, for this user model class we have to define a database table named as user. So for using entity framework, make sure we have installed the entity framework NuGet package. So just go to the reference option here, and we have here manage NuGet packages. Now just browse for the entity framework package. So make sure you are connected with the internet for downloading the entity framework package here. If you are not connected with the internet, you will not get this option. And here I am installing the entity framework 6.1.3 version here. So just accept the license. So it's installing the entity framework package in our application. So we have downloaded the entity framework package. So for creating the database, so just do one thing. I'm just going to rename it with the let's say, so here I'm just going to rename it with the name, let's say database. So just rename it with the name database, and in the database folder I'm just going to add one more class for the database context. So just add one more class here, and this class name I'm defining, let's say database context. And now just inherit this class from db context class. So db context is a built-in class available in entity framework system.data.entity namespace. Now here just define the constructor for a database context class, and here just call the base class constructor, and to the base class constructor we have to pass our database connection string. So this default connection is my database connection string. So this connection string we will define in our web.config file. So first of all I'm just adding here my user class here using the db set. So using db set, just add this user class users. User class property I'm defining it, let's say get set. Now the namespace, so it is here web data. Now just define the connection string in our web.config file. So as per my system, I have already added a connection string here, you can see. So we have the connection string tag, then pass your connection string name, and the same name we are using here. So using the base keyword we are calling the base class constructor. So base class is a db context and we are passing the connection string name, and this is a database name here, web API underscore CRUD. So we will create a database with the name web API underscore CRUD. So this is your SQL server name, this is your user ID, this is your password. So these things you have to pass from it, that's it. So now here for creating the table for this user class, let's do the migration here. So we are using here entity framework code first approach. So in entity framework code first approach we have to do the migration. So just First of all, run the command here enable dash migrations so that we can enable the migrations here. So you can see here is taking time, so please wait. So it's added the things here perfectly. Now here just if you will see it's added the migrations folder with the configuration file. Now run the next command here add dash migration, then migration name initial. And guys, if you are not aware of the migration, so I recommend here to refer our entity framework program if you want to learn about the entity framework. So just use here add dash migration and then migration name initial. It will create the migration file. So it's created a migration file with the name initial. So here it is creating a table for our user model class. So let's run the next command here. So open the package manager console and we have to run the command here. Let's say update dash database dash verbose. Now it will create the database table with the name users in our database. So just open the SQL server to verify whether our database has been created or not. So I'm opening my SQL server here and let's see whether we have the database. So you can see we have the database name as webap_crude. And if you will see we have a users table. So now just open this users table. It is empty right now. We don't have any data in this user. So you can see here it is empty here. We don't have any data in the user table. So now let's see how to write the code to perform the CRUD operation on this user table. So just open the user controller. So this is the last method we have tested with our webap. So now here I'm just going to write the method for performing the CRUD operation on our user table. So first of all, let's create the database context class object. So I'm creating here, it's a db equal to new database context. So we have created the object here and now we just define the method. Let's say public enumerable. So first of all, I'm just writing the method here for returning the list of users. So I'm just using here get users as a method name. So here we don't need to prefix the verb name. So we don't need to decorate this method with the http verb because we already prefix the verb name with our method name get users. So the http get is here optional because we already prefixing the verb name. So just return the list of user here by using the statement return dp.users, then return the list of users here. So it will return the list of user. Now let's say if you want to find out a single user based upon the user ID. So let's define that method here. So I'm defining here user, then get user. And now we just receive the user ID as a root parameter. So this ID parameter, if you will see, we have defined this in webap config file. So in webap config file, we have a route template. In the route template, we have the API, we have the controller, we have the ID. So this is the same ID we are receiving here. So now just find out the user here based upon the ID. So I'm just using here user.find then ID. So it will return the user here based upon the ID. And here you might be wondering like how to generating the URL for the get users and the get user method. So if you will see here in our route template, we don't have the action name. We have only the API word as a hard code. We have the controller, we have the ID. There is no action. So how it is going to identify like which method we are going to call? So the method calling will be decided based upon the URL and the request HTTP method. So in both the cases we are using the HTTP get method. So for the generated URL for the get users would be here API/user. This is the URL for this get users because we are not accepting any parameter here. But for the get user, it will be here ID. So ID might be here, let's say 2, 3, 4, 5. It's up to you. So in both the case, you can see we have the unique URL right now. But let's say if you want to add a new user. So for adding the new user, so we have to add one more method. I'm adding here, let's say public, and this time I'm just making its return type as HTTP response message so that we can send the message in more customized way. So instead of returning the status code as 200 by default, the better way is I want to send our own status code. So if it is created, we will return a 201 status code. If there are some error while adding the user, we will return here 500 internet server error code. So I'm just adding a method here, add user, and here just receive the user model here, user model I'm receiving here. So let's write here the code within the try catch block, so that if there is any error we will catch in the catch block. So user we are passing from the server, from the client side we will pass the user here, and here we are not doing any verb prefix here. So we have not prefixed the post verb here. So it is mandatory to decorate this method with HTTP post, otherwise we cannot use it for the post verb, or you can say for adding the new user here. So just use the method db.users, then add, pass the model here, then db.save changes to commit the change in the database. If everything is fine, we have to return the status code as 201. So first of all, just create the HTTP response message. I'm creating a response message equal to new HTTP response message, then status code as created. So we have defined the status code as created here. So it will return here 201 as a status code. So finally return here like return response. Same thing we can do here if there is any error while adding the user. So just return the status code here like internal server error. So as an internal server error, it will return 500 as a status code here. So this way we have added the method for performing the create operation here, like for adding the new user in the database. And the generated URL for this one would be here. It would be here, let's say API/user. So this is the URL will be used for adding the new user. So if you will see here, this URL is going to match with get users here, because get user is also having the same URL and add user is also having the same URL. But there is a difference. The difference is in get users we are using the HTTP protocol get method, but in add user we are using the HTTP protocol post method. We are not using here get. So here the URI is different. URL is same, but URI is different. So in case of URI, we are considering the HTTP protocol method verb as well, whether it is a get or post, put and delete. Based upon that, it will be decided which method we are calling here. Same way I can write the code for updating our existing user. The same code I'm just going to copy here for writing the code for update user. So in case of update user, I'm just accepting the verb here, let's say HTTP put, because put verb we use for the updation purpose, post verb we use for adding the new record. So in case of put request, we receive one extra parameter in the request URL. So what I'm accepting here, I'm accepting the ID. And now here, this is not the change we have to use. So here in case of entity framework, there is a method here we are just going to use here, let's say, and db.entry. And if in the user model we have all the fields, so if in the user model we have all the fields like user ID, name, address, whatever we have defined in the user class, so we can directly do the entry here, then specify the state and then set the state here modified, because we don't know which property we are updating here, but all the properties values we are getting from our client. Then just call the method db.save changes. So whatever the property we have modified it automatically do the change in a database side. That's it. And when everything is fine, just return here okay, like it has been updated successfully. But it might be the case there are some error while updation, so it will return here internal server error. But right now you will see we are not using this ID, so this ID we can reuse here for the condition here, let's say. So whatever the the ID the user has sent for the updation purpose, so same record we are just going to modify here. So just I'm going to verify here by comparing the ID with user ID here. That's it. If there is no matching between the ID and the model user ID, just return here not modified, because we have not done any changes here. This way. So this way we can customize our response status code. So it's up to you whether you want to return 200 as a status code and for 304 for the not modified and 500 for the internal server error. So this way we have written the code for updation. Now let's see how we can write the code for deleting a user based upon the user ID. So just define here public HTTP response message I'm using here. and define the method name, let's say delete user. Now here I'm just receiving the user ID as a root parameter, and this time we can skip the verb decoration here. So we don't need to decorate it with http delete attribute because already we have done the prefix or verb name. So first of all, just find out the user based upon the user ID here. Let's say user equal to dp.users.find. I'm just finding here based upon the ID. Now if check if user not equal to null. So if user not equal to null, then just delete this user. Then just use here dp.users, then remove this user from here. Then call the dp.savechanges method for committing the changes in the database, and finally return the status code. So as a status code it will be here 200. If user is not available here, we can return the status code here. Let's say not found, like user is not available here. It's up to you what the status code you are returning here. If user is not available for the passing ID, so it will show to the user like 404, the user is not available. Simple. And the generated URL for the delete would be here, let's say API/user, but we are using here this time the delete method for our HTTP protocol. So in this way we have written the code for the CRUD operation to perform CRUD operation on the user table in a database. So these are the methods we have written with the Alpha Entity Framework, and we are accepting all the parameters as per the Web API routes as we have defined in Web API config.cs file. ASP.NET Web API and Postman. So far we have created our ASP.NET Web API for performing the CRUD operation on a user table. But let's see how we can test all these methods without creating the front end part. So here we are going to use Postman as a REST client. So the Postman you can download from its official website. So let me show you from where you can download. So you can download the Postman from getpostman.com. So just download the app from here. So in my case I have already downloaded the app. So this is my app here. So this is the Postman I'm using on my Windows machine. So now just run the application using the Visual Studio. So this is our Web API we have created. So this Web API I'm just going to run here. So just run it. And so far we have not any record in our database. So we will not get any record from our database. Let's see. So this is the address for our Web API. And the same address you have to copy and use in the Postman. So just user API/user. So user is my API controller name, and here I'm making the get request. You can see here I'm getting the empty record because we don't have any record in our database. So now here let's make a post request here first of all, so that we can add a new user. So in the post request, in the body we have to pass the data. So in the post request we have to pass the data. So just select this option here. So as a x-ww-form URL encoded, we are passing the data here. So as we have the properties in a user model class, same key value pair we have to pass from here. So what we have to pass? We have to pass name, address and the contact number. User ID we cannot pass. So because user ID is a auto generated field, so there is no requirement to pass the user ID here. It is auto increment. So just pass the name, address and contact. So I'm just passing here, let's say name. So as a name I'm passing my name itself, like Shailendra Chauhan. Then I'm passing here, let's say address, I'm passing here Noida. Then contact. As a contact I'm passing here, let's say a dummy contact I'm passing here. Now here just make the post request, make sure. So just click on the send button. It will perform the post operation there. You can see it is returning the status code as 201. It means it's created the new user. Because if you will look into the code here, so in case of add user method, we are returning the 201 as a status code when it will be added as successful. So 201 we are returning. If there is any error while adding the user, it will return internal server error. So it's returning the 201, it means it's added successfully. So to verify the same thing, just again make the get request here. So now just send. You can see I'm getting here the username as Shalin Chauhan. Same you can verify in your database as well. So just open the SQL server and now just try to find out the data in our database. You can see we have a user here. User ID is 1, name as Shalin Chauhan, address as Noida and the contact number. So it means it is working fine. Now here let's add one more user here. So here I'm adding one more user named as I'm using here, let's say Deepak, and this time using here, let's say Delhi, and the contact number you can put here, let's say anything. Then again make the post request. So it is again 201. Then find out how many users we have in our database. So we have 2 users in our database. Now let's say I want to find out only one user. So for getting the one user here, just pass the user ID. So I'm passing here, let's say 2. So it will return to us only Deepak as a user when you are making the get request and by passing the user ID. You can see I'm getting here only one user right now. Before that, we were getting all the users in our database. So in this way, we are calling the method here get user, not the get users. In the get user, we are passing the ID, but in get users is returning all the users. Now same way we can call the method here update user and the delete user. So update user we can call for updating the existing user information. So we have to pass the ID as a root parameter and the user object I will pass as a request body. So let's make a put request here. So let's say I want to update this Deepak user information. So what the updation we want to do here, let's say I want to update the name as Deepak Kumar, but make sure you are passing the primary key as well. I'm passing the primary key user ID as 2. I'm passing a name, let's say Deepak Kumar. Then I'm using here, let's say address. If you want to update the address, you can update the address as well. Let's say New Delhi is my address. So I'm just using, let's say contact. In the contact you can pass the existing contact. We are not doing any change in the contact here. So this is the contact. Perfect. And make sure you are passing the user ID as well here, like whatever the user you are going to update. So I'm going to update here user having the ID as 2. Now just click on the send button. It will update the value. You can see it is returning the 200 as a status code. Now let's verify whether it's updated or not. Then again make the get request, and you can see it is showing to us Deepak Kumar this time, and its address is now New Delhi. And this way it's updated our existing record. So in this way, using the Postman, we can test our REST API without creating our front end part. So if you will get a chance for building the REST API, and if there is a requirement for testing your method, for testing your code using any REST client like Postman, like any other, you can test the things. So Postman will help you for testing the things. And the same way we can make the delete request as well. Even the same you can verify in your database as well. So in the database, if you will see, we have the Deepak Kumar and New Delhi. Now let's see, I want to delete this second record. So I'm just making here this time the delete request, then send. So you can see it is running the 200 as a status code. It means it's deleted the user having the ID 2. If you want to verify, just try to find out the user having the user ID as 2. You can see I'm getting the null because we don't have any user having the user ID as 2. So just try to find out all the user in our database. So now we don't have any user having the Deepak. The same you can verify in the database as well. Now just execute. We don't have any user as Deepak. So in this way, using the Postman, we have tested our web API methods perfectly. Now this web API we can consume in any application. Consuming ASP.NET Web API. So let's see how we can consume our created ASP.NET Web API in our ASP.NET MVC application. So here we have our already created ASP.NET Web API which we have tested using the Postman. So now the same Web API we are just going to consume in our MVC5 application. So just add here a new project. So here I'm adding a new project, and then specify your project name as I'm defining my project name, let's say a web app MVC 5. Let's define a web app MVC. This is my project name. Now here I'm just using the empty template for my MVC application. So it will create the ASP.NET MVC 5 application for us. Now here what we have to do, whatever the web API address we have, so the same address we will use here for consuming our API. So just consume the same address here. So this is my web API. We have the properties, then web, then this is the project URL. So actually this is the web API address we are just using for running our web API. And now the same we have to use in our MVC controller. So first of all, just add a controller here. I'm adding a controller named as user controller. So this is my user controller I'm adding here, and you can see using a scaffolding it is generating the code for us. So first code we have to write here for showing the user list. So for showing the user list we have to consume our ASP.NET web API. So just I'm using the web API address here, let's say URI. So it will act as a web API base address. So it will be here new URI. I'm passing the address for my API. This is the base address for the API. And in ASP.NET MVC we have HTTP client for consuming our web API. So first of all here we have to add a reference for system.net.http for accessing the HTTP client. So we have here system.net.http. We have added the reference. So now just create here HTTP client class object. So it will be here client. Add the namespace here system.net.http system.net.http. That's it. Now here just add the constructor here. In the constructor I will initialize this client class object. So client equal to new HTTP client. Now just define here the client base address as well. So as a base address I'm setting the web API base address. That's it. Now using this HTTP client class object I can call our API. So this HTTP client you can use with ASP.NET form as well, and with others type of application, let's say WPF and others type of application also we can use for consuming any REST API with the help of HTTP client. So as a response we will get here HTTP response message. So we will get the response from the server. Now just use a client, then make the get request here. In the get request we have to pass the API address here so that we can call the particular method. So just use a client.base address, and what the API we are just calling here, we are just calling here user API, because on the base address we might have more than one API. You might have the customer API, you might have the product API, you might have the authentication API, but right now we are accessing only one API named as user, and we are just fetching all the users information here. So here just verify like if response dot is success status code. If status code is success here, it means whatever the request our ASP.NET MVC application is making to our web API, it is succeeded. It's succeeded, so obviously it is returning the status code as 200, like either in the range of 200 here. So the HTTP client object will return the data as a JSON string. So just read that data. So I'm just using here, let's say response.content, then it will be here read as string async, then again call the method, again call the property as a result. So it will return the data as a JSON string, but we have to return the list of user so that we can show the list of user on our view page. But so far we don't have any class which can be used for creating the list of user. So what we can do here in the models folder, just add a class here. I'm adding a class for user view model, and in this user view model class we can define all the presentation logic, but this class will have the same properties as we have in the web API model class. So it will have the user ID, it will have the name, it will have the address, and then it will have the contact number. And here we can define here our validation rules. When we will define the view for adding the new user, for updating the user here. So right now we are just reading the value. So here just do one thing, just create the list of user here. Let's say list. I'm just going to use here user view model list. So user view model. So it will be here, let's say model list equal to new user view model list. Add the namespace. And what the data we are getting as a JSON string, that data we have to deserialize into the user view model list. So web API is internally using the Newtonsoft for serialization and the deserialization. The same Newtonsoft library we can use in ASP.NET MVC5 as well for serialization and the deserialization of our JSON data. So what we have to do here, we have to just install the Newtonsoft package using the NuGet here. So just browse. So make sure you are connected with the internet. So let's wait. So here Newtonsoft is the most popular NuGet package here. So I'm installing the Newtonsoft. So it is going to install in our application. So let's wait. So it has been installed successfully here. So just open here user controller now. And at the top level we can add the reference of the library, let's say using Newtonsoft. And here just use here the class from the Newtonsoft. There is a class here, let's say JSON convert. So JSON convert is a part of Newtonsoft.json. So just add the reference for Newtonsoft.json. Now here just deserialize the object. So we are just going to deserialize into list of user here. So list, it will be here user view model. So make sure whatever the object you are passing, that object is having the same properties as we are getting in our JSON data. So the JSON data we are getting here user ID, name, address, and the contact number. So same properties we have in user view model as well. So just pass the JSON string data and just assign into the model list. So it will be here model list equal to deserialization, and finally return the model list from here. I'm just returning the model list. So in this way we are consuming our ASP.NET Web API by making the GET request here. And now so far we have not added any view for the user listing. So now just add a view here. And using the Visual Studio scaffolding option, we can create the listing page. So we don't need to write any code for the view. So it is creating the user listing page here using the scaffolding. So let's wait. So it's created the user listing page with all the details here. Even it's created the action link for edit, details, and delete. So I'm not using here details, I'm using here edit and delete. So just do one thing, if you want to create the method for edit here. So as a primary key we have user ID. So user ID we are just going to use as a primary key. I'm passing it. So far we have not written the code for edit and delete. So first of all, let's see how we are getting the list of user here. Then we will write the code for creation, updation, and deletion as well. So far we have written the code like how we are consuming our web API and how we are displaying the data. So we can see the data when we are running both the project. So this time we have to run the web API as well as MVC project. So just do right click on the solution explorer, just go to the properties, and we have the option here multiple startup project. So from the multiple startup project, then select the start. So this way I'm selecting the start, then apply. So now when I will run the application, it will run both the project, web API project as well as web app MVC project. So until your web API will not run, we cannot consume in our web app MVC project. So here I'm putting a breakpoint so that we can understand like how it is going to be called here. And in MVC project, just do one thing, just set the startup page for our application. It should be here user and index. So now run the application, it will automatically run the user listing page as a home page for our MVC application. So that's great. So click on the start button, it will start our web API as well as MVC application. So you can see here it is coming to the user controller index method. So just to debug here, so it is trying to hit the web API. So as a status code we are getting here success, it is true here, perfect. And if you will see as a data, I'm getting here JSON string. So we have a user in our database named as Shailen Johan. So that user I'm getting here as a JSON string. So this JSON string we are just going to deserialize into the model list. So we have the one count here. So this is the user we are getting here perfectly. Now it will return the list of user. Now just do continue. You will get the list of user on your index page. So you can see we are getting the user ID as 1, name as Shailendra, address as Noida, and contact number, whatever the contact number we have here. So it's working fine. It is showing the list of user here. Same way we can write the code for adding a new user, for updating the existing user, and for deleting as well. So first of all, let's write the code for adding a new user here. So let's define a one more action result. I'm using an action result, and the method name here, let's say create. Then use here return view. For the return view, just add a view here, add a view, create template. I'm using here create model class will be here user view model. Click on the add button. So using scaffolding, it will generate the code for us. So now just do some necessary changes here. So the horizontal line I'm using here. So just do necessary changes here. So I'm just removing this here back to list. Okay, that's great. So now here let's see, we have created here the create page here. So when you will click on the create button, it will post the data on the server side. So just receive its data on the server side using the HTTP post. And here I'm just using here, let's say the user view model as a receiving object, this way. And now here I can again call the web API method here by using the client post async method. So this time what we have to do, we have to pass the data as a JSON string, because if you will see here, we are just getting the data as a JSON string here. Same way we have to pass the data as a JSON string. So just do one thing, just convert this user view model object into the JSON string. So it will be here, let's say data equal to JSON convert. I'm using here, let's say JSON convert, then serialize the object. I'm just going to serialize my model this way. Now I just create the string content. So string content is a HTTP content type. I'm using here, let's say content equal to new string content, then pass the content as a string. Then I'm using here encoding. So as a encoding, we are just going to use here, first of all, just add the namespace here, like system dot text namespace you have to add, and as encoding I'm using here UTF-8, and the media type we are using here, let's say application slash JSON, because we are passing the data as a JSON string. So this is the way to convert our JavaScript object into the JSON string, and here I'm just creating the string content so that we can pass it as an HTTP content. So just receive the data here, HTTP response message, it will be here response equal to, it will be, let's say, client, and this time making the post request, then pass the request URI. So I'm passing the request URI, it will be a client.base address, plus it will be here, let's say, a user, and we are making the post request, so we have to just pass the HTTP content. So we are just using a string content because string content is a child class here for the HTTP content, then the result. So this is the way for making the post request here. Now just verify whether we are getting the success status code or not. So it is here, if it is success status code, so it is fine here. So what we can do here after adding the user in the database, we should redirect to the user listing page. So just return redirect to action, and here I'm just redirecting to the user listing page here. That's it. If there is any error here, it will return to the same page by showing the error. Perfect. So this is a way for adding a new user into a database, and through the web API we are trying to add it. Same way we can write the code for updating the existing user. So just create the copy for the create method here, and just use here edit. In the edit I'm just receiving the ID as here, let's say ID as a root parameter, and based upon the ID just fetch the data from the database. So as we made here the get request in the index method, same way we have to make here get request for getting a single user here, but this time in place of list it will be here user view model. So just use a user view model, I'm using the model here, simple. So I'm just doing here some necessary changes. So this is the user object, and this time we have to pass the ID here, shell as plus ID, I'm passing the ID here. If a status code is fine here, it's okay, then we'll turn the list here, and the typecasting would be into the user view model, not the user view model list. Perfect. And from here we have to return the model. And guys, here it's up to you for the edit. Either you can use the existing create view page, either you can create the new one as well. So what I'm doing here, I'm just going to use the existing one create page. So I'm passing the view name as create, and for updation just use edit here this way. And here in case of edit we have to make here put request. So just make the put request in place of post, and just pass the user ID as well, plus I'm passing here, let's say, model.user ID for the updation. And after the updation just redirect to the user listing page. If there is any error while the updation, so just return to the same view page. So it will be here create, and just pass the model this way. So in case of create we are using the same create view, we are not creating the separate one. So what we have to do for the create page, we have to do some necessary changes, like the heading we have to change here. So for the heading just write here a ternary condition, I'm just using here if model not equal to null, so it means it is a added page, edit, else it is a for creation. So in place of putting the create as a hardcode value, I'm just using it using the title. So instead of putting the create as a hardcode value, just use here title, view background title, then horizontal line this way. Even the same thing we have to do here for the button as well. So In place of button, value should be create, it should be here save, so that it will work for create as well as for updation as well. In both the case it will work now. So let's see how we are adding the new record and how we are updating the existing one. But for the updation on the index page, make sure we are passing here the action name. So this is the text name. Actually first one is the text name, the second one is the action name here, and make sure you are passing the parameter as well. So as a product ID I'm passing the, as a user ID I'm passing here with the form ID parameter. So let's see how it is working. So let's run the web API project as well as our MVC application project. So first of all, just try for adding a new user. So just click on the create new user. So it is expecting the user ID here, but user ID is a auto increment field. So in case of create, we can skip this one. So just do one thing, just open the create.cshtml page, and in place of creating the text box here, what I can do, I recommend here you should use the hidden field, because in case of edit it is required, but in case of create it is not required. So just use here hidden for, and as a hidden for I'm using here, let's say model and model dot user ID. So for user ID I'm creating this hidden field. Okay, now just reload the same page again. You can see now there is no user ID here. Just pass the name. I'm passing the name, let's say Mohan. Address I'm passing here, let's say Delhi. Contact number I'm passing here a contact number. Click on the save button. If everything is fine, it should add. So it's added a new user here named as Mohan in our database. Same we can verify in the database as well. In the database we have one more new user with the name Mohan. Now let's update it. So for the updation, just click on the edit button. So it is showing the details here for the Mohan Delhi. So what I'm doing here, I'm just using here, let's say Mohan Kumar, and it is here, let's say New Delhi. Now click on the save button. So it's going to be updated, all the things. So it means create, update and get operations. All these three are working fine. Now let's see how we can write the code for deletion, like how we can delete the record. But here before performing the delete operation, we should show the confirm box as well. So what I'm doing here, I'm just using new HTML attribute. So it will be here, let's say on click. So in case of on click, just use here, let's say return confirm, and the confirm just show here, let's say are you sure to delete. I'm just confirming the action here, let's say, so that when the user will confirm, yeah, sure, I'm sure to delete the record, then it will delete, otherwise it will not delete. So this is the text here and this is the action. So what we have to do, we have to define the delete action in our user controller. So just define the delete action as we have defined for edit. So just copy the edit here and do the changes as per the delete. So it will be here, let's say delete, and we are not receiving any object this time, but we are just passing it. So in place of get, just use a delete async, and if everything is fine, we should redirect to the user listing page. So just use a return a redirect to action. As an action, I'm just redirecting to the user listing page. And guys, here in our case, we are not using the Ajax for deletion purpose, like for deleting the record in the background. So what we are doing here, this is the complete action. So if it will not be deleted, it will show us the yellow page, but because there is no delete action, so better way is, so we are just going to redirect to the index page. So it doesn't mean whether you are deleting or whether it is not successful, it will reload the page again. So it will give us the experience of reloading. So let's see how it is going to be deleted here. So here just click on the delete link. So you can see we are getting here a confirm box. Are you sure to delete? No, I'm not sure. Click. So no record has been deleted. Delete, then OK. A record has been deleted. So in this way we have done with the CRUD operation in ASP.NET MVC and Web API. So with the help of ASP.NET Web API and MVC, we have done the CRUD operation. So Web API successfully we have consumed in our ASP.NET MVC project.